Coloradans really want another round of COVID shots now that the pandemic is in so many people's rear view. Xcel kept certain customers from turning up the AC this week. Listen, they knew that could happen. Summer is over, someone tells Summer. The risk in our wet weather followed by the prolonged heat we're seeing. And the winning artist at the state fair was a computer.
They're saying, I didn't make it. You cheated. You're not an artist. I disagree.
You can decide on Next. Hundreds of thousands of COVID booster shots are coming to Colorado, which raises the question, do people want them? COVID's no longer top of mind, with the weaker variant circulating and most Coloradans having some level of immunity from either catching the virus or getting a vaccine, or both. Anush Roy has some perspective from a trusted voice.
Tell me about the booster shots that are going to be showing up in Colorado. And if I understand correctly, they're variant specific?
Yep, so they're Omicron specific, and it's got the BA4 and BA5, which is what we've been seeing for the last several months circulating. So this one, in theory, will give you a little bit broader protection because it's more specific to what we're seeing.
With the vaccines, we've always talked about, you know, the vaccine gives you that broader protection, right, against COVID and multiple variants. Now this is a booster for a specific variant. You know, how do you reconcile those two?
Yeah, so this is what we do with flu every year. So for people that say, well, this is, you know, weird science, we've never done this, we do this every year. There's always lots of different strains of flu circulating. It's not just one. This is sort of the natural evolution of this.
What does that tell you about the evolution of living with COVID, that you're starting to develop vaccines more like the flu vaccine?
I think it's a good thing. Obviously, again, I think hopefully we're over the major hump of where people were so profoundly impacted by this. During the pandemic, we never saw flu and COVID at the same time. This year, at least again, looking at the Australian data, COVID was definitely a presence. We usually mirror what they see. Their equivalent of our November, they started seeing cases of flu skyrocket. And the number of cases was higher than it's been since probably 2009. We haven't been exposed to flu for 2 years. So basically 2 years without exposure, which means we are probably, our defenses, our army is not well trained. They've been on vacation for the last 2 years or hanging out at home. And so now our army of our immune system needs to go back to basic training and get with the program.
I'm thinking the perspective of families with kids. What should they be bracing themselves for?
I think it'll just feel more normal, or maybe a little less charged, in that when you see it, you're like, oh, this feels kind of like it did before. And it'll be novel because for 2 years, all we've thought about is COVID, 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 right?
So the CDC just agreed with advisors to recommend those boosters. Around 300,000 have been ordered for Colorado. Now, the Omicron booster, though, hasn't been fully tested on humans yet. So ultimately, that means we really don't know how effective they will be. It still has to be studied, and that's going to be after it's being rolled out to people. But health experts are saying, you know, the flu shot is actually not tested on humans year to year. It's that original vaccine that has been tested, then it's tweaked a little bit, you know, depending on the strain. The same thing is happening with these boosters as well.
I feel like in the years that we were a lot more afraid of COVID, we heard about the warning about flu and COVID overlapping in the wintertime previously.
Yeah, it's come up multiple times, and Dr. Barron said it hasn't happened, right? It didn't pan out that way. They've commingled before. We didn't see that giant surge in flu cases. This year, what could be different is that we don't have a lot of people wearing masks. The schools are back in session. We're traveling more, and so all of those factors, they're worried about how that's going to play out in the next couple of months.
Shots coming after Labor Day for anybody who wants them. Anusha, thank you. We've been watching Colorado's COVID test positivity rate for a couple of weeks now because we were hoping that we'd finally dip below that 5% threshold for the first time in a long time. But the rate's kind of plateaued as kids have gone back to school. 6.1% of tests have come back positive over the last week. We're not talking at-home tests. We're talking officially monitored tests. For a few weeks, we saw those numbers fall, but we've been in that 6% range for about 2 weeks. Below 5% is where public health experts consider the virus to be in check. Thousands of Xcel Energy customers wanted to crank up the air conditioning this week and could not. But you know what? That's what they signed up for. Xcel says it had an emergency energy situation on Tuesday. One next viewer told us she couldn't lower her thermostat below 86 degrees until 8 p.m. This is something customers signed up for with the AC Rewards Smart Thermostat program. During high energy demand, Xcel can control their air conditioning units and lock down thermostats. Typically, customers can override the message. No such option Tuesday. Xcel says it's the first time they've done that in 6 years. They blamed a power unit in Pueblo that went down. About 22,000 people have signed up for the program. There's chatter on social media that the energy shortage happened because Colorado was selling energy to California's grid that day. Xcel says it's absolutely not true. A state law gave Colorado's oil and gas regulators some real power in 2019. Green groups are frustrated the state isn't using it. They say the commission's only adopted a handful of rules on things like dust, noise, and light. The groups want the commission to protect Coloradans from ozone, air pollution, and mitigate the impacts of climate change. They're looking for an equity analysis for projects that are close to communities disproportionately impacted by pollution, places that have carried a larger share of Colorado's pollution burden for decades.
And that's something that's been perpetuated. And currently, a lot of disproportionately impacted communities are along freight corridors, for instance, so they get the transportation emissions, and then there's a lot of industrial emissions. And also a lot of oil and gas activity.
Environmental groups want regulators to limit high-emission oil and gas work on heavy ozone days, and they want a shutdown on new permits if Colorado isn't meeting its targets to reduce greenhouse gases. We are getting some feedback on wording that we use to describe a gun rights group in Colorado. Greg emailed, "Why does Next always include far right when reporting on Rocky Mountain gun owners?" That is a very fair question, Greg. I think when most people think of a gun rights group, they tend to think of the NRA, National Rifle Association. Rocky Mountain Gun Owners, which again is based here in Colorado, has a more absolutist view on gun rights, as in they think the NRA is too moderate, too willing to compromise, too squishy. RMGO may be best known for opposing Republicans who support the Second Amendment, but not in their absolute terms. In RMGO's view, they would rather have gun control Democrats in office than a Republican who supports limited gun control. So that often means that RMGO is supporting far-right Republicans in primaries. It's a long story to explain the adjective that we kind of use offhand as shorthand when referring to Rocky Mountain gun owners. It's a good reminder that we should take the time to occasionally explain it more in depth. Appreciate the invitation to do that. It won't be long before ballots are sent out for the 2022 midterms. Today, members of the state legislature went over the language in the state's Blue Book, that guide that you get that explains the issues. As we've reported, unlike Denver's voting guide, which can include any kind of happy horse excrement that advocates want to put in there, the statewide Blue Book is supposed to be true, which is helpful when you're voting at all. The Legislative Council, a group of 18 Republican and Democratic legislators from the State House and Senate, went through that Blue Book today. Last check to make sure that it's accurate. Legislators can request amendments for changes. So that brings us back to Denver's hot mess express of a voter guide. As politics guy Marshall Zellinger always reminds us, Denver's voting guide can be unicorns and Bigfoot if they want. There's no need for it to be accurate. Comments for and against issues are just printed without a fact check. There you go, voters. Good luck. The City of Denver. Our next question is about the coming school closures in Jeffco. 13 buildings with low enrollment, like Emory Elementary in Lakewood. Sue King wrote in to ask why'd the district waste money doing improvements there the last 2 summers. I interrupted myself. That was a first. Sue, the district tells us that it did not have Emory on some kind of pre-closure list when it got the bond money to do work at that school. The district says it spent about $2.3 million on the 2018 bond investment on Emory. In total, the district spent about $16 million on schools that were eventually recommended for consolidation. It's about 2% of all of the bond-funded projects from 2018. That spending and more that could have come with it actually came up at a board meeting last week.
We have, however, not spent $12.2 million on projects that we've deferred because we knew that this work was coming.
Sue also asked us what's going to happen to the Boys and Girls Club that is stationed at Emory. Jeffco School says they're discussing moving that to Lasley Elementary. The winning artist at the Colorado State Fair was not a Coloradan, was not a person, in fact.
I think the competition was created for Colorado residents. And if you're using an artificial intelligence, does that qualify as a Colorado resident?
We'll let the AI defend itself. Our summers feel like they're getting longer.
What we are seeing is kind of that later start to fall.
That is making our wildfire risk worse, even after wet summers like the one we just had. That's next. Can't say we've ever covered the State Fair's art competition, but this is the first year it has been won by our robot overlords. The winning piece was created by artificial intelligence. Actual artists who got beat out are not happy. It's a great debate over what constitutes art and what AI should do. Here's Noel Brennan.
I love a good autumn in Maine.
Art may not require an artist, just an author.
I picture a banana and an apple doing the fandango under starlight.
And I had this vision like a blue tree, huge, and there are bicycles growing off the tree.
Using a program called DALL-E 2, my coworkers' prompts can create paintings.
I would like to see a portrait of a wise old woman. She's seen a lot in her life, but she has kind eyes.
Artificial intelligence produces very real results, like it did at the Colorado State Fair.
I put an AI-generated art piece into the contest in the digital art category, and I won first place.
Jason Allen had never entered an art competition before, and he's gotten some flack.
They're saying, I didn't make it. You cheated. You're not an artist. I disagree. The AI is a tool, like a paintbrush is a tool, and there is a creative force and a mind behind it.
But AI arguably did most of the work.
Did the person who won the award create the program? Should the person who did create the program have credit in the award?
Jessica Hare also competed in the state fair and took third.
I have been doing art for so long. I don't know if I'm qualified to say that it is artwork or is not artwork.
I mean, I think this art, it had a voice, you know, and I think the artist that made it had a voice creating it.
Cal Duran judged the pieces, but didn't know Jason's was done with AI. He'd still give him first place.
I've got some emails where people were like, you know, art is gonna die, and, you know, I don't think so.
It wouldn't be fair if we didn't ask artificial intelligence to weigh in. Will artificial intelligence make art created by humans obsolete?
Philosopher AI's software can tackle a question like this.
AI will never be able to produce this kind of work without some sort of connection between itself and the universe around it.
Art's always been about technology, and we're just entering that new phase.
Any of us can capture imagination on canvas.
That's Maine.
This is like Van Gogh, right? It's Van Gogh-ish.
It has legs. The apple has legs.
So Jason says he took home $300 along with that first place blue ribbon. He says he really had no idea there was prize money, Kyle.
It's a fascinating story, Noel. So, I mean, he didn't just like shout a couple quick words into the computer and then it made that amazing painting.
Yeah, that's what he says. He says he had like 900 iterations of that same painting, and he spent, he said, 800 plus hours getting it just right, and he's still trying to perfect it. That's what he says.
That's a fascinating discussion about whether somebody has to pick up an art tool in order to create art. That was good stuff. Thank you, Noel.
Yep.
Colorado benefited from a wet summer. Fire danger could return quickly.
The ground has a relatively short memory.
And our longer summers are making the situation worse. And we found a sign of the way things used to be. You spotted the missing E on I-70. The backstory, next. By now, almost all Coloradans should have their TABOR refund checks, those $750 or $1,500 checks that we talked a lot about earlier this month. This is your money that the state owed you under the law and is giving back to you in the form of a refund. The Department of Revenue told us everybody should have their check by the end of August. So far, the state says it has sent out 2.4 million checks to households. 86% have already been cashed. It's about $2.1 billion returned to taxpayers. The state says it is still processing and will still send out payments for extended tax filers. Those folks should get their refunds by January. If you're thinking you should have your check by now and you don't, you should call the handy number on the screen there. That's the TABOR Refund Call Center, 303-951-4996.
Hello and happy September. My goodness, it was a warm one this afternoon. Our average daytime high for the month of September typically peaking so close to about 80 degrees. Rainfall just a little over an inch, and yes, snow. We got to talk about snow. Typically our average just shy of 1 inch. We were in the 90s this afternoon up and down the I-25 corridor off to the eastern plains, some 70s and 80s up in the mountains with just a few high-level clouds out there tonight, especially up into the high country. We'll be looking at this little front just digging into eastern Colorado tomorrow afternoon. Possibly a couple of isolated storms, but overall, we'll just be looking at a few clouds, some gusty winds coming our way here in the Denver area. This is early tomorrow morning. The sunshine is back for your Friday. We're looking good as that front digs in. Maybe a couple of pop-up showers off to the east, a couple up in the high country, nothing severe, nothing major, and then it's well on our way to our Labor Day weekend. Highs return to the 90s again tomorrow. I know the trend goes on. Triple digits out to the west with some 70s and 80s up into the mountains if you're looking to cool off. We will be watching a slightly cooler day, just 90 degrees on Saturday, and then we jump back to the low to mid 90s on Monday. In the 90s, they're just here to stay.
Lots of sighs in the 70s again, yeah.
I know.
Summer has ended, according to the meteorological definition. The summer third hottest on record in Denver. In fact, 3 of the 5 hottest summers happened in the last 3 years. The last 2 years at this time, we were seeing worse drought conditions and real bad fire danger. All the monsoon moisture that came in really helped immensely. The map shows where we saw the most significant improvements in the drought conditions, the darkest areas on the map. We got in touch with Becky Bollinger, the assistant state climatologist, who said the consistent rain this summer has kept the soil moist, kept us from drying out. But a long dry stretch could easily erase that. And if it feels like our summers are getting longer, you're not wrong. It's climate change.
You're kind of extending that warm period where the monsoon is ending, but you haven't started your winter precipitation pattern yet. The fall is kind of undoing the benefit of any of that summer moisture that you had. The ground has a relatively short memory, so it doesn't take a long string of dry days with no precipitation to really dry that vegetation out and kind of prime it as a good ingredient for wildfires.
So the monsoons helped, but what we really need is snow. Snow is what is critical for our water supply. Denver is also supposed to have another La Nina year, which means drier fall, more snowfall for the northern mountains, less snowfall for the southern mountains. So we could see the soil dry out pretty quickly. 3rd year in a row that we've had a La Nina pattern, which is very unusual. Bollinger said that's only happened once in the last 50 years. It's a sign that's clearly missing something. And we'll share your feedback about transparency on our end next. It's a sign of a spelling mistake that actually gives us an opening to talk some history. This exit sign on I-70 is missing something. Do you see it? It's the last E in Silverthorne. It's gone. That is a temporary sign. CDOT says the permanent one going up in the fall will have the correct spelling. But this actually leads us down an old path. So Silverthorne is named for a guy who spelled his last name without an E, just like that on the sign. Judge Marshall Silverthorne. He made mining claims in the area in the 1880s. Send us a sign that might lead to a good story or an interesting explanation. Email them to next@9news.com. Speaking of our explanation, a viewer wondering why we use the adjective far right to describe the group Rocky Mountain Gun Owners, RMGO. KH writes in to say there's a very thoughtful response. There's no hyperbole involved in that. I would hope not. And Max says taking the time to explain your usage of the adjective far right could earn you another adjective, transparent. I think that's our goal. I think in the news we often use shorthand a lot to try and quickly communicate often complex issues. And you're always welcome to write in and say, hey, stop, slow down, explain that. Why'd you use that word? Why'd you show that picture? We should always be happy to explain that. See you next time.